In this video, I'll demonstrate how to build an ASP.NET application using Visual Studio.NET. If you haven't already, I'd strongly encourage you to read Lesson 23 in the workbook. It'll contain a lot of introductory material and concepts that I'll refer to during the course of this walkthrough. Assuming that you've read the lesson and you're ready to get started, we'll begin by creating a new project. We'll go to File, New, Project. We want to make sure that we select Visual Basic Projects as the project type, and we want to select ASP.NET Web Applications as the template. When you do this, notice that you cannot enter a name for your new web application, that this is grayed out. So to change the name of your web application, you'll need to pretty much remove everything after localhost / and then type in this case, Lesson 23. Then click OK to continue on. Now before we actually get into the process of creating a new application, dragging and dropping controls on the web form and that sort of thing, let's take a look first at what Visual Studio.NET has actually done for us when creating a new ASP.NET web application. First of all, let's take a look at the directories on our hard drive. It's going to put the application in one of two places. First of all, you can look at Documents and Settings / whatever your username is / My Documents. So if you go to My Documents and then you scroll down to Visual Studio Projects, it will either be here, as you can see it is in my case, Lesson 23, or it's going to be on your C drive or wherever you find the inetpub folder for your instance of Internet Information Services. You'll scroll down to the www root folder, and it'll be one of the folders in that www root folder for Internet Information Services. So it kind of depends on your installation of Visual Studio.NET. But just knowing where the physical files are should be helpful in if you need to delete it or whatever the case might be, change something. Then I'm also going to show you what Internet Information Services looks like whenever you create a new application. I'm going to hit refresh so we can see the new project that was created. In this case, Lesson 23 was created for us. So not only does it create physical files on our hard drive, but it also makes an entry within Internet Information Services and puts the appropriate permissions and things of that nature. If we look at the properties, it sets everything up for us. So if we need to delete Lesson 23 project, we'll need to delete it both in Internet Information Services and off our hard drive before we can create another project by the exact same name. So that's kind of a small point. You probably won't need to do that very often, but you'll need to know that there's two places you need to delete things from if you were to want to remove this project from your personal computer. Let's go ahead and close Internet Information Services and get into Visual Studio.NET and take a look at some of the files that were created for us in the Solution Explorer. First of all, by default, it's going to create webform1.aspx. The first thing that I always do is I change this to default.aspx. That'll be the first web page that comes up if you were to type in, like in the example of LearnVisualStudio.net, www.learnvisualstudio.net. What it brings up first is default.aspx. So this will be the home page for my application. Then there are some other important files. We're not going to take the time to look at them all in this video, but I'd strongly encourage you to take a look at the 3000 series, which will explain some of these concepts in more detail. There's the global.asax file, which has some settings for your entire project. This file is run each time a request is made from your web project once you deploy this to your web server. And then there's also other settings of a more static nature that can be stored in the web.config. This is an XML file that can change settings like permissions for the website, whether you want to be able to debug this application remotely and things like that. Again, I'd refer you to some more of the more advanced material in the 3000 series for more details. For our purposes, we're just going to look at the default.aspx. And one of the first things I want to do is click this button here, which is Show All Files, to demonstrate that concept of having a code behind. You'll notice that, first of all, we have our designer surface, and that is the default.aspx. We also have the default.aspx.vb, and if you recall from the lesson text, that is the code behind for this web page. So if I double click that, you're going to see something that looks very much like the code view for the Windows Forms applications that we've already been working through the last 22 lessons. Now don't be confused. If you take a look at the designer surface, the .aspx, there's also little tabs here at the bottom. We're in design mode, but we can also look at the HTML representation for this page. And you can see that there's a lot of HTML tags here. Not much, I guess, to get started with. We have a form and a body and a head and the HTML tags themselves. Interspersed amongst that is some ASP.NET code. Now we won't take the time to look at this just now, but this is a tag. It's called a page directive because it has the word page in it and this little @ symbol. And what it will do, one of its biggest jobs is to define the language that we're going to be using on our code behind, and then also where it can find the code behind for this .aspx page. In this case, look at, it's telling the ASP.NET Engine to look at default.aspx.vb. So it's just a pointer to where it can find the code behind for this page. Let's get back into the design mode, which is a more visual way of looking at our design. So now let's take a text box from the Web Forms tab of the toolbox, and we'll take that text box and we'll just drag it onto our designer surface and see what happens. There's actually a couple things that happen. First of all, let's take a look at our HTML view. Notice that now between the form tags, the beginning and ending form, there's an ASP text box. Now this is not an HTML tag. This is something that the ASP.NET Engine will interpret. This is called a server control. And like I described in the lesson text, what will happen is ASP.NET, the engine will recognize as it's going through the code for this page that, hey, they want to put a server control on this page, and it uses some of the properties like the style information to determine the name of the text box and where it should be positioned on the web form. But secondarily, it also, in the code behind, will create a reference to our new text box. You see here, protected with events text box 1 as system.web.ui.webcontrols.textbox. So it takes care of that step for us. What this does is it allows us to reference that text box without having to wire up the connection between these two files on our own. It takes care of all that for us. So here I can set the text value equal to hello world. So despite the fact that it's in two different files, the text box is represented in our design view here, we can write code to set properties of that text box in our code behind file. So let's go ahead and run our application quickly to see how this will work. I'm going to click the Start button, and whenever you're debugging a web application, it's going to bring up a web browser, your default web browser, which is probably going to be Internet Explorer. And after a few moments, you'll see that indeed we have a text box with the word Hello World in it. Now, our web application doesn't do a whole lot at this point, but we can see how easy it is to create controls on our web page that we can refer to in our code behind. It takes care of a lot of the plumbing work for us to do that. Also, let's go ahead and drag and drop a button onto our designer surface. So I've shown you how to navigate between the two files, the actual ASPX and the ASPX.VB file, by switching using the tabs at the top. But if I want to write some code for this button's click event, all I got to do is double click that button, just like I do when I'm developing Windows Forms applications, and it will automatically create the button 1 click event. Now notice also that we get that protected with events button 1 as system.web.ui.webcontrols.button. So this gives us a way to reference that button despite the fact that they're in two different files physically. So here I might want to change the text in my text box 1 to hi there whenever somebody clicks the button. Now, what this is going to illustrate is the concept of postback. Whenever I click the button, it's automatically going to post the values from this form back to the code behind, and it's also going to designate which control triggered that postback event. In this case, we're going to see that it's the button 1 click event that did it, that triggered the postback. Also, let me comment out this line of code because we'll get into some weirdness that can happen in just a moment. But let's go ahead and run this. And after a moment, it'll show up here. Now I can click my button and I get hi there. Now, to show you that sometimes we can have a conflict between what goes on in the events and how the events are fired within the code behind. In this case, the page load will occur first, and then the button click event will occur next. So that means there's some ramifications. Let's expand this example out, and what I'm going to do is grab another text box and put it here. And then I'm going to write some code here. So we're going to do enter first name here, and then text box 2.text equals enter last name here. And I'm also going to add a label control. Now, a label is just that. It's not editable by the end user, but you get to modify the results or what is in this label using code behind if you want to. So we will, let's change the default value. Well, we'll go ahead and do that in here. So we'll do label1.text equals an empty string. When somebody clicks our button, what we want to do is append together text box 1 and text box 2. So let's do that. Label1.text equals text box 1.text and text box 2.text. So now let's run our application and see what happens here. So I'll change this to Bob and then Tabor and then click the button. Now, this did not give me the intended results that I was expecting. It actually appended first name here, enter last name here. It appended those two strings together, what we currently see here. And the reason that occurs is because what we were doing is initializing the values for our text boxes in the page load, and this event fires first. Once this event is done firing, then the button 1 click event is allowed to fire. But at that point, we've already changed the values that were in our text box 1 and text box 2 to enter first name here, enter last name here. So it kind of screws up what we're trying to accomplish. What we can do, like I've noted in the lesson text, is kind of wrap this initialization code in an if statement. So if page.isPostback equals false, then if. Okay, so what this is basically saying is if we're posting back, in other words, if this is the initial visit to this this page and we need to initialize the values on the page, then we will initialize the values like so. However, if if we are posting back and that value is true, then we'll skip all this code. So this will help us avoid these thorny situations. So just by adding that, let's go ahead and run the application again. And we'll change this to Bob and Tabor and click that, and it works correctly. Let's take this example a little bit farther. What I want to do is post back whenever the value in this text box changes. And so we can capture that and then write something out to our label here. So whenever somebody changes the value in our text box and then maybe moves to the next text box to make a change there, a post back will occur. And so to do that, what we're going to have to do is set a property on our text box called auto post back equal to true. Then what we're going to do is write some code for our text box. So let's go to text box 1 and then select text changed event, which creates a private sub text box 1 text change. So whenever that text change, a post back will occur and we'll capture that event. So in that case, what we'll do is label1.text equals changed name. So we'll just change the text label, or rather the text of the label. So let's go ahead and try this and see what happens. I'm going to change this to Bob, and then I'm going to move my mouse cursor into the text box 2. And when I do that, I don't know if you heard the little click and saw the little bar come across the bottom, but what occurred was a post back which fired off our text change event that allowed us to write code in the code behind. And in that code behind, we set our label1 text to change name. Now there's something significant about this. And that is, it did not change the value of this text box. How did our application know what the value of last name should be and what the value of our first text box should be for that matter? After all, we're working in a stateless environment. The web server doesn't remember what values we had in here last time. And so there had to be some way to reset the state of our application, especially those values in text boxes or any other interactive controls on our web form. And so let me show you. I'm going to click View Source. So here's the source code to our web page. And I want you to notice one thing in particular, this input type equals hidden form field. The name of it is viewState, and its value is this long string of numbers and letters. And those numbers and letters represent the values that are in each of these text boxes, the label control, and the button. Now this is a relatively small viewState value because we've only got 4 values on our web form. If we had a dozen or 2 dozen values, this might be several lines long. And these values are encoded so that only the ASP.NET Engine can interpret them. So what happens is all this stuff gets posted back whenever we, for example, change the value of the first name, the text box 1 text value. Gets posted back. Our page load event fires. Our text box 1 underscore text change event occurs, and then the rest of the values are populated by what was originally posted inside this hidden form variable viewState. So from a practical perspective, all you have to know is that it just works. But behind the scenes, this is what's actually going on, that there's actually a lot of work involved to make this all happen. So there's a lot of things I didn't demonstrate in this video. I didn't demonstrate the use of the session or application objects, the query string and cookies and other things that are inherent to developing web applications and web forms. Again, I strongly encourage you to take a look at the extended readings and also the 3000 series on LearnVisualStudio.net for more information about creating real-world ASP.NET apps. Don't forget to get your hands dirty also by doing the exercise for Lesson 23. You'll get an opportunity to build a little calculator online that takes advantage of the facilities provided within ASP.NET. Thank you.